Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Charter Authorizer Support Initiative quarterly training on handling closure responsibly. And I'm going to turn the time over to Tiffany.
Hi, good morning. I was just going to give 30 seconds more or so for people to join. We were figuring on a few more people have registered, so I will speak really slowly for the first slide. This is the Charter Authorizer Support Initiative, better known as CASI, quarterly training. Let me see. Let me get set up here. A little bit about CASI. The Charter Authorizer Support Initiative, CASI, is a collaboration between the California Department of Education, Charter Schools Division, and the following local education agencies: Los Angeles County Office of Education, and we have a representative here, or a few, that will be speaking a little bit later this morning, San Diego Unified School District, and Santa Clara County Office of Education also has representatives here that will be speaking a little bit later. Whoops, forgot the rest of it. The purpose of CASI is to support professional development and networking opportunities for charter school authorizers. This work is funded through the Public Charter Schools Grant Program, authorized under Title IV, Part C of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And as you can see, I am required to read all of the words on every single slide. So please bear with me on some of these slides that are a little bit more lengthy and include education code. We will obviously include other information besides what is written on the slides, but I am required to read all of the words on the slides. Next is our CASI offerings. We have several offerings throughout the year. One is these quarterly trainings that you are now attending. We also have monthly charter chats, which hopefully you are registered for. And there will be a link at the end of the presentation so that you can access all of these offerings that we have. One-on-one technical assistance or support. Those can be on-site trainings or done as via Zoom or webinar. We also have a mentoring program that we are trying to get together in the next couple weeks here. We still need more information from all of you. So at the end of the presentation, there will be a survey link for that mentoring program. If you could please take the time to fill that out, that would help us gather more information on what people are hoping to get from the mentoring program. And then, of course, you will see us all at many conferences this year. Charter School Authorizing and Oversight 101 conference presentations are our specialty. Next is our caveat. The information contained in this presentation is provided as a reference only. Charter schools and chartering authorities are encouraged to review the laws and regulations and consult with their own legal counsel regarding the application to their specific situations. And today our topic is managing charter closure and non-renewal responsibly. It's not a topic that everybody wants to talk about and plan for, but it is really important to have specific procedures and protocols set up so closures can run smoothly. Today's learning objectives include understanding the legal framework for charter school closure and non-renewal in California, learning the California Education Code and regulatory compliance requirements. And these are very important, and we will review these in detail. Developing effective communication strategies for education partner engagement and creating comprehensive transition procedures for students and families. It's the responsibility of not only the authorizer, but also the charter school to notify specific entities, and we will review that in detail today. helping to build capacity for compassionate, responsible oversight during closure, and then learning best practices for minimizing disruption to student learning. We'll provide several resources and items that you can customize to your specific closures that will help you be more organized and have a specific protocol in place. And just a reminder that every charter school closure affects real students, real families, and real communities. Our goal is to transform this challenging responsibility into an opportunity for accountable oversight. And more specifically, our overall focus for this presentation will be on the actions that occur after a closure decision is made, not the processes or actions necessary to revoke, non-renew, or otherwise move to close a charter school. So these are all things that happen after the moment the decision has been made that a charter school will close for whatever reason. And then next on our list is to review the agenda for today. And I want to go ahead and introduce Deidre to do that for us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Tiffany mentioned, I'm Deidre. I'm the director in the Office of Charter Schools at San Diego Unified School District. I'm going to cover real quick the agenda for today. Welcome and introductions. As Tiffany mentioned, we are required to read all the words on the slide, so I'm going to read straight through this one. Welcome and introductions, and then we'll have an overview of charter closure landscape. We're going to cover the legal framework and compliance, including California Education Code, regulations, and authorizer responsibilities. We'll discuss some communication strategies, educational partner engagement, and family communication procedures. Transition planning, so that's student placement, records transfer, and asset distribution. And we'll close with some case studies and best practices and lessons learned from charter closures. And next slide. As noted, I'm Deidre with San Diego Unified School District. We also have with us today the other CASI collaborating districts and county offices of ed. So we have Michelle Johnson from Santa Clara County Office of Ed and Indra Ciccarelli from Los Angeles County Office of Ed. And they'll both be presenting some information as part of today's training in just a few minutes here. Next slide. So we're going to cover now overview of charter closure landscape. If any of you have been to the charter chats or previous trainings, you're probably very familiar with this graphic. This is kind of the process and the life of a charter school. So we start with the petition, moving on to the approval and opening of the school, and then the monitoring and oversight process, onto the renewal process, and then at some point, if necessary, what we're focusing on today, which is the closure process. There's various types of charter closures. Non-renewal, I think, is likely what most folks have seen. That is exactly what it sounds like. That is a charter school that has been in operation, has come up for renewal, and for whatever reason has not met the standards to be renewed. So we call that a non-renewal. The other type of charter closure is a surrender of a charter. This can include things like a voluntary surrender of a charter. One of the things we've seen and have done is what we consider to be a merger or consolidation of charter schools. So affiliated charter schools have merged together. There is one charter that remains, and then the other charter is surrendered. So that would be an example of a voluntary surrender of a charter. And then finally, the revocation midterm in extreme situations. So this is an authorizer has to process a revocation of a charter during its charter term. I think these happen on occasion, not very frequently, but they do happen. And I think next table has some statistics, charter school closures by the numbers. So this is data from the 2021 school year or fiscal year to the 24-25 fiscal or school year. So overall, during that time period, there were 101 charter schools that closed over 5 years. The peak year for closures was fiscal year 24-25 with 33 closures. This was a 135.7% increase from the prior year. And the lowest year for closures was 2022/23, which had 12 closures. We included some data points, closure by reason. Voluntary closure is by far the most common reason for a closure, and it's consistently the dominant reason, with a total of 85 schools or 84.2% of closures being voluntary. There's also the closure through non-renewal. During that time period noted, there were 8 schools representing 7.9% of closures. No longer operating as a charter. So this essentially means that the charter school has transitioned back to the district. It's no longer operating as a charter school. During the 5-year period, there were 5 schools, or the equivalent of 5% of the closures. 2 schools, or 2% of the closures, were closure due to revocation. So those were schools that were revoked during their charter term. And then 1 school, or 1%, was considered not meeting conditions. So essentially, this charter was approved but did not meet the conditions to open. Oops, sorry, there's one more quick note on that last slide. Just a note that mergers of charter schools are included in the voluntary closure numbers, and you can access this information at the CDE link that's provided in the slide. Thank you. Next slide.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Amy Carson at the CDE. She compiled all of this closure information. It's really interesting if you have an opportunity to go to the link and check out that page.
Thank you, Tiffany. And then this slide is, again, California charter school closures by reason. It has the no longer operating as charter, closure through revocation, not meeting conditions, closure through non-renewal, and voluntary closure, just in a different format. So instead of having a narrative style, we've put it into a bar graph for you to view the 5-year period. But this is just an illustration of the information and statistics that were on the prior slide. And oh, I should note, of the schools that were considered voluntary surrender, 8 of those schools, no, I'm sorry, 7 of those schools were schools that were approved but never opened. So those would also be included in that voluntary closure category. And next, I believe we're going to Tiffany to pick up with Ed Code regulations and responsibilities.
Yes, I have the great pleasure of reading to you all of the education code that goes along with closure for charter schools. So these are the education codes for closure. The procedures for charter school closure are guided by California Education Code sections 47604.32, 47605, and 47607, as well as Title V, California Code of Regulations, sections 11962 and 11962.1. We will review what all of these education codes say. We just wanted to make sure that you had them in the PowerPoint for easy reference. Closure procedures are found in 47605C50 specifically. The procedures to be used if the charter school closes. The procedures shall ensure a final audit of the charter school to determine the disposition of all assets and liabilities of the charter school, including plans for disposing of any net assets and for the maintenance and transfer of pupil records. And later in this presentation, we'll talk about where all of this information and directions can be found. The Title 5, California Code of Regulations, Section 11962 is Section 11962. The charter school is required to provide notification of the closure to the following: the parents or guardians of students, the authorizing entity, which would be you, the county office of education, if the county board of education is not the authorizing entity, and the special education local area plan, or the SELPA, in which the school participates, and the retirement systems in which the school's employees participate. Now, you would have to show evidence of all of these notifications. So how would you know that these have been completed? What kind of evidence could you collect from the charter school? Because this is their responsibility. You can go ahead and unmute and let us know how you would collect this evidence, or you can type it into the chat. Is anyone brave enough to unmute and say how you would collect this evidence? Deidre, how would you collect this evidence?
I would request copies of any written notifications that went to families and or other entities.
Okay. And then we would also keep track of those as well, the dates and what the timeline was for each of these notifications. And then this also helps you to keep track of who knows what during the timeline. As the authorizer, you don't want to inform families prior to the charter school informing them about what their current situation is. Your office may receive lots of phone calls asking questions, and it's good to know what the timeline of notification is. So charter petition instructions on closure procedures. Many school-specific closure protocols are found in the petition itself, element 15 specifically, or the memorandum of understanding. Many of you have MOUs, and there are more specific instructions or timelines that could be outlined within the MOU that are not necessarily spelled out in education code or the California regulations. Also, the renewal, right now, while schools are renewing, is a great time to review the closure procedures that are listed in element 15 to ensure robust processes. So of course, during renewal, that's the last time that charter schools want to be thinking about a closure that may or may not happen in the future. So it's our job as authorizers to really review that section and ensure that it has all of the necessary pieces in case in the future that there is a closure. The Articles of Incorporation and board bylaws also include closure procedures and protocol, mainly about assets. So you want to make sure to review those to ensure that the charter school is following their own spelled out procedures. Closure instructions for authorizers per the CDE. So the previous slides, we were talking about what the charter school requirements are per ed code, and now these are our requirements. During a charter school closure, the authorizer of the school will need to send the following information to the CDE: the description of the circumstances of the closure, effective date of the closure, location of pupil records and personnel records. This piece is very important to figure out as a team with the charter school. Agenda minutes of the charter school's board approving the closure, and then the submission date of the independent final audit due within 6 months after the closure of the charter. And we'll speak a little bit more about financial requirements in later slides. All of this information is found in Ed Code section 47604.32 and Title 5 of the CCR section 11962.1. Now, the authorizing board, your board, may want to have a board resolution of the surrender of a charter school And I attached a sample here. We'll make sure that that ends up in the resource folder after this presentation so that you're able to check out one from San Diego Unified. The sample will include the date of the charter approval and the current term dates, identify the issues that led to the closure, the surrender, or the non-renewal, a list of attempts at correction with dates of what your office did to help the charter school make corrections, the charter board meeting date where the surrender of the charter was voted on, where that took place, and then the authorizing board's acceptance of the charter surrender and the effective date of the surrender. And next we have educational partner engagement and family communication protocols. And I believe that Indra will take over from here.
Yes. All right, so next slide. I will start with reading the slide and then I'll discuss a little bit more and get into a little bit of some detail or some examples. So Charter Educational Partner Communication Plan for parents and families. You want to be thinking about the initial notification letter, town hall meetings, individual consultations, enrollment assistance, regular updates via multiple communication methods. And for staff and faculty, you want to be thinking about an all-staff meeting, credential assistance, job placement resources, or references/employment verification letters. So to talk a little bit more about this, these are all best practices, suggestions for closing a school. They're not specifically authorizer responsibilities, but they could be depending on the circumstance. So best case scenario, we've had schools that are make the decision well before the end of the school year, months ahead of time. They start notifying their parents, their communities. We've seen schools that not only do individual consultations themselves with the parents, but may invite the district to come in with their counselors and have individual consultations with the parents. In terms of enrollment assistance, we've seen schools that have held enrollment fairs and invited all nearby charter schools and private schools and district schools to come into a fair to meet with parents and students. And so we see a lot of that communication and a lot of help to the parents and families. On the other side, we've seen schools that have simply walked away, and as the authorizer, we were then sending letters out to the parents and the families and working with the district to try to confirm where all of the parents were going to go instead. We've had schools that have closed right at the beginning of the year. And so, we're starting just by going through CalPads and seeing if those kids show up somewhere else at another school. And then again, working with the district to potentially reach out individually to each family to try to confirm where their student is enrolling or going now that this school has closed. In terms of the staff and faculty, again, best case scenario, the school is working with those staff to make sure that they've got a job somewhere else and potentially giving them, reference and employment verification letters. Best case scenario, we ask all of our schools to actually have a reference and an employment verification letter attached to their folder as part of their records, so that when we as the authorizer get those requests down the road, a year, 2, 5, 10 years later, we can just go into that folder, make a copy of that letter and send it out. But again, worst case scenario, we've had schools where we're literally going in and just trying to find whatever records we can when the landlord calls us to say that that they found things with Laco letterhead, and do we want any of this stuff? And so we're just going in and pulling file cabinets and pulling records and then trying to put together what we can when a staff asks for employment verification, and we provide as much information as we can based on what we have. So so that's a little bit about that. Next slide. charter board, charter administration, and authorizer communication plan. Transparency, be honest about reasons and timeline expectations. Empathy, acknowledge the impact on families. Support, emphasize available resources, student placement, written processes, records transactions. Provide clarity, provide specific next steps, the importance of the closing agent duties, and an outline of actions needed with due dates. So again, best case scenario, you're really being transparent. Everybody's on the same page. You have a clear checklist. You're very clear on all of those steps that need to happen and who's responsible for each of those steps and ensuring that those things get done. Next.
We do have a question in the chat. Michelle did answer it, but I want to go ahead and read it out loud and see if you want to answer as well, Indra, or Michelle can read her answer out loud. The question was, in case of non-renewal, should the charter appeal to the county? Do the closure procedures pause? And Michelle?
So what I said was the answer is essentially yes, but remember, when the non-renewal happens, it's simply saying you're not going to renew the rest of their new term. So the charter would continue on through the end of their term until those final appeals may take place. Usually those appeals are still happening through that charter term, which is why we have recommended to all authorizers, do not put the charter term in the middle of the school year. Put it through June 30th of the end of the school year. If you do it when your board takes action, then that charter term ends in the middle of the school. And we're then trying to scramble and figure out where we're going to place a child in the middle of the school year because that charter term ended on November 15th, rather than through the end of the school year on June 30th. So make sure you put your charter terms to always start on July 1st and end on June 30th.
And the other thing I'll say to that too, like, yes, certain procedures would pause, but I want to highlight that idea of sort of transparency and clarity with the community and those involved. So, even though they don't know if the school is going to close or not, they should be sending letters out to their families and communications out to their families to let them know what is happening and what the potential possibilities are. And then even working with those families for them to understand what their options are if the school closes, so that if it doesn't close, great, everybody stays and things move on. But if it does close, parents and everybody aren't scrambling last minute to try to find a spot or figure out where they're going to go. They should be doing a lot of that work ahead of time so that the families are all very aware of what's going on, what potentially could happen, and what their options are and what they should do if the school does close.
And I think it's a much better situation for families to hear about it from the school rather than reading about it in a newspaper article, which has happened. So keeping the families informed is really important and respectful. So,
and I did see Tom also posted, any thoughts on an appeal or, heaven forbid, a mid-year revocation? Any differences? Yeah, I think mid-year is always difficult, right? Because those families or those kids are sort of scrambling to find a new educational option very quickly. I think when we've had that, that's where we're really jumping in with the district and working closely with the district to really try to track all of those kids one-on-one, looking through CalPads, looking through whatever information we have, and reaching out directly to those parents to try to really confirm almost on a one-to-one basis where those families are going or what they're doing. That tends to be a sort of, like I said, a scramble and all hands on deck, versus if it's an end of year closure and you've got several months to sort of plan things out, things aren't quite so hectic, and you may not necessarily need to track every student on an individual basis because that they've been given those options through enrollment fairs and counselors and all of those different pieces.
I do think it's a good idea for the authorizer to be prepared and have some protocols in place for a mid-year closure. As Indra was talking about, San Diego Unified has established that if a charter school does close mid-year, that our district would give priority to students enrolling at that time. So they would move ahead in any of the lists in order to be placed right away. So just having things like that in place to protect students.
Yeah. And Rick noted in the chat as well that, even if the district has revoked, there still is that appeal process that the school can go through and can remain open as they're going through that appeal process.
And I will jump in and say that in all of the times where I've seen a mid-year closure, it was in response to us starting the revocation process and the school deciding to voluntarily surrender rather than going through the revocation process. So they wanted to be the ones to make that decision rather than having someone else tell them to close.
So, all right, next slide. So yeah, that prompted some questions and some discussion, which is great. So perfect timing because we're going to go into some breakout rooms and provide you 10 minutes or so to discuss some of the lessons you've learned with past or current closures and maybe questions or things you may have based on this presentation. So breakout rooms, you're going to select a room based on topic of interest. Number 1, educational partner communication. Number 2, closing agent. Number 3, records. Number 4, timelines. Or number 5, asset distribution.
Opening now.
Well, our session went really well, and we had some weird things going on, so that's why we're finishing our discussion out here. Indra, did you want to get started kind of recapping what your room went over?
We must have answered all the questions really well in the presentation because it was just me and Mifula in the room. So we got to talk to each other, but yeah.
I think we had a question. I saw a hand. Did I see a hand? I'm like, now I'm looking for the hand. Okay, and in room 2 with Deidre?
Hi. So we talked about the closing agent, the importance of the closing agent, um, and ensuring that the closing agent is someone who will be around for a while, not a few days or a couple months, but someone who will be there for quite a while, someone who staff and families and students can reach out to request any types of records that they need and get a response. And we also talked about the importance of when the records, the student records, in our case, student records, I realize counties may take more than student records, but as a district, we will accept just the student records from the closing charter. The importance of having printed copies of certain records so that we have access to them because we do not have access to the electronic system once it closes, once the charter school closes. So we request printed copies of official and unofficial transcripts and any other important documents that a student may need to access.
So that leads right into my room's topic, which was records. And we reviewed several of the things that Deidre talked about. Let's see, who was in my room? Is there anything else that you want to include that you thought was important from the records conversation? So we mainly just talked about the difference for us as a district. We don't accept any staff records, but we do try to work closely with the charter school to ensure that they have staff records somewhere and that they are also writing letters of proof of employment or employment verification. Because really often we get calls from people that that worked at a charter school 10, 15 years ago, and they're asking us to verify their employment, which isn't something that we're able to do because we didn't know what kind of role they had there or how long they were employed with the closing school. So we really try to emphasize that they need to provide all of that information to their staff before the closure of the school. And then the next group was Michelle for timelines.
So we actually spent a little bit of time talking about the SCCOE charter procedures, closure procedures. And so we actually have a checklist that provides all the different timelines. And so we spent a lot of time talking about, well, is it different for a county office versus a district? And do these impact immediately, or is it held in abeyance during all of the renew? And I'm like, these take effect the moment they actually close. And so we started talking about all of that, and I'm making sure that our checklist is available to whoever would need it as well.
Yes, we do have Santa Clara's checklist, which is extensive, and then we have a shorter, more general version that could be customized that's from San Diego Unified. And so we will provide those in the reference folder or the resources folder after the presentation.
So
And then-
Jeff asked the question, what is the consequence if they don't meet the timelines?
We're going to close them.
Well, we'll tell you later.
I think it depends on which timeline it is. You're writing letters at this point, they're already closing. And so I think that you get into those difficult situations where they're not meeting timelines. And unfortunately, at that point, already the worst thing that can happen to them is already happening. They're closing. So, hoping that you maintain that relationship is the best case scenario so that you're able to help them follow all of the timelines. Thanks, Jeff, for that question.
Maybe I could just
Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Indra.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I know we're gonna talk a little bit about it later too, but just keep in mind there are at least a couple pieces that as the authorizer, you would sort of be liable for if, they missed a timeline when it came to the final audit or something like that, then there are a couple pieces that you may be liable for completing.
And I was just going to say, I've been in conversations nationally with authorizers sometimes where, and it's hard because that would cost money, schools don't, but literally things have come up like, does every school post a bond that says, if they walk away from their responsibilities where you no longer have any leverage, is there some way you can kind of recoup some of and we never came to a conclusion, but that was the kind of desperation that some authorizers who'd been in a situation where somebody just after all your leverage was gone, they weren't doing stuff. What do you do?
Okay, we're going to get back to our presentation now. Let me go ahead and find where we're at. Oh, my screen is paused. Let me start over here. Sorry about that. Is it showing anything on your screen, or is it blank?
No, it says you've started screen sharing, but we don't actually see it.
Oh.
It says double click to enter something.
Mine is not happy with me. Is there anyone else that is able to share theirs? No, it keeps going to like a blank screen. I'm not sure.
Tiffany, you want me to try?
Yes, if you could. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty here.
Did that
Yay.
work?
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're moving on to student placement, records, transfer, and asset disposition. So the first slide we have here is to develop a shared checklist, which we've spoke about extensively to work from. So both the authorizer and the school are on the same page, literally. Ours is we usually use it as a Google Doc, so it'll be in real time. Michelle, if you want to try to open that one so they can get an idea of what that looks like. So I have two tabs here. One is just a running list of a task description that needs to be completed. Like I said, this is very general. It can be filled out and customized depending on your particular situation. And then it has a place for the start and end date. And on the next tab here that Michelle went to, that's fine. We track all of the students as well to ensure that they've transferred into a school and that their records have been sent. So as they start with the full list of students that are listed here, and then they let us know what the new school placement is and the dates the records were sent. And we follow up with some of these schools to make sure that the records are actually sent. And then we follow up in CalPads to make sure that those students are disenrolled from the charter school and picked up by the new school that they will be attending. And then if you want to cycle back to the presentation, LACO also has a checklist that I've listed here. It is more detailed if you want to click into that one. Indra, I don't know if you want to talk about yours a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty comprehensive. We've gone through it a number of times. We recently revised it post-COVID. We had 6 schools close within a year and a half. And so we had to go through a fair number of closures, and we went through and really sort of revised our checklist. You'll note we've kind of got it broken up into different sections. We make sure to have a due date, the responsible parties, noting when it actually was completed, and having a section for notes. But I think it's a good document people can use to adapt. Keep in mind, there are some pieces in there that may be based on our own sort of MOU or agreements with our charters. So you want to make note of what may or may not apply for you, or what you may or may not want to do as the authorizer.
Thank you, Indra. And then I
You
believe
see
that
mine?
Santa Clara is also in the resources, but she's going to bring it up for us right now too. Great.
So, yeah. So it, just like with Indra's, and it has, here's the dates for when things are due and who has to do them. Okay.
I'm sure everybody's just basically waiting to get their hands on these checklists as part of the presentation. So on the next slide, we have working with local districts to have enrollment recovery plans, monitoring student enrollment and placements, and record and CUME transfers. So trying to keep track of those as best as possible. I'm going to continue to read this slide yet. So support development of a plan for retention of employee records, like I talked about previously. That employment verification piece is so important, and we get a call at least once a week with a heartbreaking story of a charter school that had closed a decade ago, and they're unable to move on with their career because they need this information in order to be hired somewhere. So it's a really important piece. Be aware of communications with educational partners when the staff messaging happens, when the family messaging happens. Likely your office may get phone calls asking for information about the closure. And it's really important, the messaging piece, to have the same message as the charter school and to know when those are going out so that you're not providing information prior to when the charter school planned to let their educational community know. So just being mindful of some of those things can be really important. And then on the next slide, I think Michelle is going to take over for financial responsibilities.
Yes. So, as you know, we have to read everything on the slide. So here is the checklist with regards to financial responsibilities. You look at the planning and closeout. So you want to develop a closure timeline and milestones, notify educational partners, meaning the vendors and agencies, coordinate with the authorizer and the auditors. And so with regards to that closeout, you need to make sure that everything is taken care of. You're not actually doing the work, but you are making sure that the charter school has gone through that process of notifying the different people. And that's why we have those checklist pieces so that you can see that things got done. With regards to payroll and employment, you want to make sure that that the charter school has issued that final paycheck and have done vacation payouts, that they have submitted the final state teacher retirement system and public employee retirement system contributions, and that they have provided COBRA and benefits continuation notices. That submit the final STRS and PERS contributions is really important because we have seen in the past that if those things fail to happen, then the authorizer has been on the hook for that, making sure that final check gets taken care of. And if you're trying to now figure out how to get it back from the charter school because you had to pay for it, you may be out those funds and you don't want to have that happen. With regards to vendors and contracts, you need to make sure that they pay the outstanding invoices, that they terminate the specific contracts and leases, and that they've notified the vendors and service providers. So there are a lot of requirements around financial responsibilities that you want to make sure get taken care of. With regards to asset distribution, there's debt and leases. They need to settle the loans and the lines of credit. They need to return any leased property or equipment, and they need to document debt settlements. With regards to assets and inventory, the inventory, all assets that were purchased with public funds, and they need to return or transfer federally or state funded and donated items. The first place you always look is the charter to determine how they're going to manage their assets and their loans and leases. With regards to some of the, we've had a few schools close. As I said before, if they're part of a network, then those assets and things can be distributed to their sister schools. However, if they're a standalone school, they'll have either an auction or they'll donate it to another charter school. I've seen various ways of handling this, but they need to make sure that they document everything.
Michelle, we do have two great questions in the chat, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
One of them
Let me
is-
finish reading this last little piece
yeah,
and then I'll
sure.
get the questions. So net assets may be transferred to another public agency, such as another public charter school, if stated in the corporation's bylaws or through an agreement between the authorizing entity and the charter school. Okay, now I've read everything on the screen. So
Teresa's asking, what if the charter school is closing because it ran out of money and it cannot pay its vendors or pay its debts?
Well, in that case, not only are they closing, they're also declaring bankruptcy and they're having to go through that process as well. So it's not just dealing with the charter school closure. Now they're having to deal with all the fiscal pieces. So one of the nice things about the education code is that authorizers are not on the hook for any of the debts or liabilities of the charter school if they have done their due diligence in managing their oversight. If they have not, then you as the authorizer may be liable for those debts. And so you want to make sure that you have all of that documentation, that if they're in the process, if you've been monitoring their fiscal, you've been monitoring all of these pieces, you have this proof that you've got the notices of concern, you've got these emails that you've been going through. In order to protect you from liability, you need to make sure that you've been doing your oversight.
And then Jeff has kind of a follow-up question. Does anyone require their charter schools to set aside an impound account in case of closure?
We haven't, but because we've heard it now a couple of times, we're figuring out how to put it into our MOU to protect us because we've gone through all of this insanity. And so that's a great idea.
Part of the problem though is that if they're struggling financially, you say, oh, we better have an impound account to pay off your bills in case you can't. It pushes them further into debt and then they blame you. But it's like, this has happened too many times to
Right.
not require it, right? So yes, it does hurt them even more to have to set aside money and they can't pay their bills, but they don't pay their bills anyway, so you need to set it aside.
Yeah, and I'll say too, they can still, even though we will have that set aside as an impound account, like it's still on their books as part of their theoretically to bring them to the 3% reserve, which is also required. So
Right. The other thing that you need to be aware of is sometimes because they're now going through the foreclosure or the Chapter 7 or Chapter bankruptcy, you're getting pennies on the dollar. And so you have to look at where you're at from the hierarchy of the debtees, essentially. So how are you going to get funded? So I will tell you that we had one school that closed and they still had funding in the PCSGP grant and certain things. And so we needed to notify CDE so that they could get their money back or stop distributions before things came out. So you want to be really aware of where your schools are in this process and keep all of the different players in the loop. Because if they're not notifying their vendors, then those vendors are going to come after you going, whoa, how come we weren't notified of this closure?
I have one more that's from Rick from our office. Rick, did you want to go ahead and just do that one out loud?
Sure. So Kelly from Oakland had a great question about a third-party LLC when they purchase a facility, and then the school actually pays the LLC for the facility. They're paying rent to the LLC, but indirectly they're actually paying for their loan for the LLC. So after the school closes, she's kind of wondering what happens to that asset, the building asset. So I don't know if anyone has any experience with that. So this kind of goes with some network schools or schools that have a lot of property assets.
I mean, the Ella, in our experience, I mean, that LLC still owns that property. So it's
Yeah.
really based on that, right? If the LLC remains open, they may rent it to another school. They may do whatever they would normally. If the LLC decides that they're closing as well, then I think now you're talking about sort of that corporate law and what's in their particular bylaws and stuff in terms of what they can do with that.
Yeah,
I think that's like my particular concern is that, this oftentimes the school paid for this for the building, then transferred it to the LLC. And like, yeah, now it's the LLC's building, but it is paid for by the school, and there's no obligation to actually return those funds to the public or to another school. So like, I like I get what like legally it says, but like, is there anything that folks have done to be creative in ensuring that those funds actually end up with like students, or just that the executive director doesn't walk off with the building?
Yeah, there have been several legislative proposals that have tried to deal with that and tried to fix that sort of loophole, I guess, that we see. But none of those have passed at this point.
Nope. So, yeah, great questions. Unfortunately, we don't have all the answers. All right, so fiscal responsibility, financial responsibilities. So as I was mentioning before, there are grants and restricted funds. So you want to make sure that the closeout for federal title programs occurs. You submit public charter school grant program and other grant reports. They return unspent restricted funds. Those actually need to go back to the CDE. They don't go to their sister school. There is also accounting reports and audits. They need to prepare that final year-end financial statement. One of the things that we've had right now is those unaudited actuals do need to be uploaded into SACS. And we had the charter school that closed asked for a little bit of extra time because they were dealing not only with the unaudited actuals, but actually closing out the system. And so we finally got that document yesterday. We got it on the 14th and it was due on the 15th to the CDE. So be aware that timelines are really, really important. They need to complete the independent audit and submit it to the CDE and authorizer, and they need to account for restricted and unrestricted funds. So they're doing that year-end audit, plus they're doing the final closeout audit, and that needs to happen within 6 months of closure. So just be aware. Ensure completion of an independent final closeout audit within 6 months. See, I just said it. After the closure of the school, that includes the following: an accounting of all financial assets, an accounting of all liabilities, and assessment of the disposition of any restricted funds received by or due to the charter school. And in addition to the closeout audit, closure procedures must include a plan for completion and filing of any annual reports required by Education Code Section 47604.33, which include the following: the local control and accountability plan and annual updates due on or before July 1st, interim financial reporting reflecting changes through October 31st due on or before December 15th, second interim financial audit, financial report reflecting changes through January 31st on or due before March 15th, and the final unaudited report for the full prior year due on or before September 15th.
And they can combine, they do have the option, depending on the timing and when they're closing, to combine their closing audit with their final end of year audit as well.
All right, and I think I now turn the time back over to Tiffany.
Yes, this is the all-important lessons learned from recent charter closures. This will kind of be a group activity here. We can move to the next page, the next slide. Things we learned the hard way. Student records, digital and official transcripts for students are so important to get all of that situated, not just for students that have graduated from the charter school, but have attended at any point. At San Diego Unified, we now have keep those records digitally, but having the actual paper printed out official transcript is important as well, especially for college and universities. At the district, we cannot create or sign transcripts. That is the closed charter school's student information that is able to create those transcripts. So we don't sign those. I don't know if either Michelle or Indra, if your county signs transcripts for students.
Our office will, if we've got the records and we can see you know, we have student records where we can pull credits and see graduation and see all of that, then um, our office will end up, well, not my office, but the county will end up creating a transcript, a signed transcript for those kids.
So the
Thanks,
way we handle it is that we send a letter saying that we're the authorizer, the charter school has closed. We cannot create a transcript. However, here is proof from CalPADS that the student did graduate, and here is a copy of their final records if we have that file. Otherwise, it's simply we don't have those files. They no longer, here's the CalPADS information. And we send them a copy of that letter, the CalPADS information, as well as the closure documents. And that has worked for every entity that we've needed to send it to.
And San Diego Unified does something very similar to that as well. But it would be nice to just have the copy of the official transcript to be able to give. So working with your closing charter school to make that happen is the best case scenario. Audit pieces, I don't know if anybody wants to share anything you learned the hard way from audits. I know that Indra was talking about being able to merge those two audits. That is great. Michelle, you
That's-
muted, so.
I will say that's one of the pieces too that you are potentially liable for, especially as the county, that you may end up having to pay for those audits if they haven't done that. So I know one of the things we'll do, even if ideally they do everything and they pay for it, great. Second best option is we have our impound account, and if they don't pay for it, we have some money in the impound account we can use. Third option is we've also, a lot of times when a school is suddenly closing, because at the county apportionment filters through the county, we're able to kind of stop that apportionment and hold on to it. And so that's another way that we'll end up having potentially some funds to pay for that final audit. And it also gives us a little bit of a, we talked earlier about like, what if the school doesn't want to do it? Well, if we're holding some apportionment or some money, then that's at least a little bit of an incentive for them to do what they're supposed to, because then, they're waiting for us to sort of cut the final check to them.
And I will say that because extensions for audits require the authorizer and the county to sign off on that and grant that extension, you need to basically kind of hold the line on that and make sure that those closing agents are available to make sure that the audits get completed.
And we'll come to the closing agent learn the hard way in a minute. How about employees of closed charter schools? If I have spoken on this several times, making sure that you have the employment verification and possibly letters of recommendation, if that's something. At the district, we do not collect any staff records, but I know at the county, sometimes those records are collected. Indra or Michelle, did you want to chime in on anything for that?
Yeah, I mean, we do collect those records and we hold them. We do ask the charter schools to purge their records before they send them to us. We don't want discipline records. We don't want all of that. We're basically just looking at, the original signed contract, copies of credentials, some very basic information that should end up being in that employee's file when they transfer it to us. But similar, Tiffany, to what you're talking about, like we do ask them to put a employment verification letter at the front of each of those folders. So theoretically, when we get that request, I can just go to their folder, grab that, make a copy, and send it off. That's sort of best case scenario.
Yeah, so just like we did with our student records, we do the same thing with regards to employee verification. Send them the information of the school closure, send them the information, but we don't handle letters of recommendation. And all we can verify is whether or not they were an employee. We don't have anything, we don't have what type of job they did, how much they got paid, or any of that other piece. We just simply say, yes, here's the date that they worked at this school.
Yeah, and I think, you've heard a lot of us talk about getting these requests 10 years later or more. Um, so trying to have some of these things in place as much as possible, and holding on to those records, because you will get those requests 10 years later. For the schools that have closed recently, I have those letters of verification because that's a process we have in place now. But for schools that maybe closed 10, 15 years ago, I don't have that. I'm just going and seeing what I can find, and trying to write some sort of a letter that says, yes, we have evidence this person worked at this school from this date to this date. Um, but that's pretty much it. I think we will verify not just employment dates, but if I can, I will say they were a full-time teacher or a full-time, um, administrator or whatever I have indication of. I will give an indication of what their job was. Um, but that's it. I can't, a lot of times those verification letters from districts or something, they want to know like how many days were they contracted for, and how many days, how much sick time do they, like, I don't have any of that. I can say you were employed from this date to this date as a full-time teacher, done deal. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, same for us.
If it's a recent closure, we like to direct those inquiries to the closing agent. But in the past, our closing agents have moved quickly out of the country and were not available to answer any of those important questions. So the closing agent piece is really important. And if you at all have any input on the selection, just encouraging it to not be the school leader who usually likes to distance themselves as much as possible from the closing of the charter school quickly after it happens. And someone that understands that this is an ongoing responsibility. This isn't something that only lasts 6 months to a year, that you could still be getting inquiries 8 years, 10 years down the line about the closure of the school. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in about closing agents. They have not been very helpful for on our end, being able to contact them 6 months after closure. So
Yeah, I will say too, sometimes with the closing agency, we will ask our schools to, like, they may identify a particular staff member who is sort of handling all of the closure procedures up to a certain point, and then that person is being released. And so we ask them to then identify a second person for ongoing. Because a lot of times the closing agent, the original closing agent, is like a staff member, like it is the school leader or somebody that they're paying to do all of this. And that person stops getting paid, and you still have those final pieces in terms of maybe the final closing audit and the dissolving of the nonprofit board, and you've got all those pieces that person's no longer even there for. So making sure that that board understands their responsibility and identifying people, and if this person now stops working there, is no longer handling those, then who's the next person that is now acting as that closing agent.
and also going back a little bit, Indra mentioned the purging for personnel records that that they collect at the county. We like to make a list of what we would like in the student records, just because we learned it the hard way that we don't need a file full of like 87 referrals and all of the late notes that the mom wrote and all of these art projects and things. So we get these gigantic files that really only have 3 pieces of paper that we need in them. And that takes a lot of time for someone to review all of that and purge them. So kind of just giving a list, which hopefully they'll reduce those files before you receive them. And then that brings us to the almost to the end here. Did anybody in our audience have any questions or things that they wish we had talked about that you haven't put in the chat yet?
Maybe I'll just chime in with one just to toss out there. And this is, hopefully a very rare circumstance, but Indra and Jeff both alluded to it kind of, which is, it, the data is that most closures at this point are voluntary. If you're ever in a situation where it is being loudly contested, you have to navigate this responsibility to prepare for the transition with the constant accusation that you're trying to sort of predetermine the decision and the appeal and making it kind of de facto you're closing it even if we win the appeal. But you can't sit back and it's a very tough dilemma, and I don't have solutions. I'm just pushing that was a situation that I encountered. Now hopefully that is such an outlier scenario, but if you're ever in that situation, pick up the phone and call others that have lived through it, because it's hard to navigate both of those responsibilities at the same time.
And then we have a question or comment in the chat as well. Do you have any suggestion on how to handle the media, all forms, during this time?
Yeah, I'd say, we're not actively posting anything or reaching out to any media. But I will say when media reaches out to us, we stay very focused on process, right? And it really is just our response is always process based. Our board voted this way. These are the timelines involved. The school can appeal, whatever it is. We stay very process based in terms of any of our responses to the media.
And I'll agree with Indra on staying focused on process. And when it is a voluntary closure, we always redirect it back to the charter school. But we also make sure that our board, as the authorizer board, is very aware of the process of what's going on. We are holding meetings with our board, sharing, here's the actions that were taken, here's the things that we knew about leading up to all of that, because it's never good when it's playing out in the media.
Yeah, and we've had a couple cases, to sort of Michelle's point too, we've had a couple cases where the school self-closed, but the parents or the community doesn't always understand that, right? And they'll be sending stuff to my superintendent, my board, don't close our school. Why are you closing our school? And so we have to have sort of a very empathetic response that basically says, this isn't our decision, we didn't do it. This was a decision made by the school itself and their own board, and if you have concerns, you should be contacting that board and the school. So yeah, it can be tough.
The only other thing I would throw in is, if you go to any of the PRSA meetings or this kind of thing, it's communications 101 in schools, and that is, no matter how legal and procedural your answers are, somehow you have to loop your answer back to it's all about the kids. And that find a way to bring it back to the kids at the end of your answer, just to make sure that stays front and center.
I will say this particular question is kind of I use it as a funny AI example. We had a situation where that was happening. The community was very upset. It wasn't our decision. The school itself had decided to self-close. And my initial response, I guess, when my bosses and when people were looking at it, they said it felt very cold. I was just kind of like, hey, this wasn't our decision. We didn't do it. The school did it. And they were like, this is still our community. We still have to be nice about it. And this just sort of feels very cold. So I threw it through AI and asked it to be nicer and to, with a prompt that this is our community and we want to be, empathetic. And it ended up softening the tone of my response a lot. It did a much better response. And I always joke, like, what does it mean that AI was able to be more human than I was? But yeah, so keeping in mind that empathy and when you are responding to your community in the media.
That is a great transition to our next slide, which is that authorizers who are effective in these closure situations are those who see closure not as an ending, but as an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to student welfare and responsible governance. So that does bring it back to students, and it's important that we are following all these steps and taking care of students and families in the community. Closure isn't failure, it's part of responsible authorizing, making sure kids get what they need. So we can move on to the next slide. Michelle, will you move me? Oh, she's on the phone. That collaborate with the County Office of Education. So I know that several of you on here are counties, but the other half are district authorizers. So the County Office of Ed is not only an authorizer, they have some shared responsibility for district authorizer schools in their county, including fiscal reviews of schools, teacher credentialing oversight with CalSAS. Many provide support, training, networking for district authorizers in the county, so taking advantage of those opportunities as well. Districts find out who are your authorizing points of contact at the County Office of Education to gather all this information about support and training. Coordination of county and district monitoring functions, that has a lot to do with things like CalPEDS and CalSAS, the ADA reviews in PADC, and some other fiscal items as well. There are a lot of collaboration and training opportunities for districts and counties. And next is our resource page. This is actually links, but I know that we sent out a PDF for you to review. So I'll make sure that all of these items end up in the resources folder at the closure of this presentation today. And next, of course, we always love your feedback. It helps to let us know what you would like to see next, what you enjoyed about this presentation, what you think we could have done better. We read each of the surveys. We take them very seriously. We would appreciate you filling this out for us. Just takes a few moments today. I think it takes less than 3 minutes to fill out each time, and you can do that while I keep blabbering, and then you'll be done with that for now. That would be great. And then I believe the link is in the chat. Is that right, Michelle? Yes. Okay, great. And then the next one is our mentoring program. If we can move to that slide, this QR code does work. So after you've spent the 3 minutes filling out the first survey, you can go ahead and use your phone and fill out this mentoring program information as well. If you've already filled it out, don't worry. If you don't know, you can fill it out again, and I will recognize that it's duplicated. That's not a problem. Michelle has also put the link in the chat. If you don't have time to do that today, please copy the link and add it to your to-do list for later on next week. And then our next slide is our upcoming CASI events. We have the monthly charter chats. The next one is October 29th, a little bit later this month. And then we moved the November to this December date, and I believe that all of those notifications have gone out. So that'll be December 10th from 10 to 11. Let's see, someone said the survey link required that I request access. Which survey was that for? This is one of the questions in the chat. So if we can have Michelle look at that and let us know. Oops.
So it's the actual October survey. The meeting survey.
Oh, great, got that. Can you finish the last couple slides and I'll check on that?
So as we said, the November charter chat has been canceled and has been moved to December 10th. And because the December 31st charter chat was going to be on New Year's Eve, we have canceled that one, and we will then, so we're combining November and December into December 10th. And we will then see you in January. So the CASI quarterly training in January will be held on January 23rd from 9 to 11 a.m. and the topic will be dependent charters. And so if there are any questions or concerns, we thank you for your time here, and you can contact us at cassie@cde.ca.gov.
And I do just want to plug, like, we talked about the mentor program, but you can contact us as well for technical support, one-on-one help. And we are also willing and able to go out and provide on-site training for you or your staff. If that's something that you're interested in as well, please let us know.
Can someone try to access the survey and fill it out? Tell me if you're able to do that now. That would be great. It worked. Yay. That was a fast response. Thank you. So before you leave, please click on that survey, fill that out real quick. It's only like 4 questions, I think. You can all do it. I believe in you. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you soon.